Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead on and get started. All right. All right, good evening. This is the last one before the reception. We can go get some drinks. That's always a good ending. All right, again, my name is Teresa Edwards. I am with Warner Brothers Discovery. My title is a business consultant. I do a lot of talking. I make sure stuff get fixed, put it like that. I'm also the president and founder of From School to Possibilities. I was one of the finalists for one of the Impact Awards, so I'm very proud of that. So, thank you. So we're gonna go ahead on and get started. I'm gonna because the ladies are holding it down. One of our, what's his name, Michael, he was not able to make it today. So, but that's okay, we're here. So we're gonna hold this down and talking about what's next for DE&I. So I'm gonna let my panelists introduce themselves as they answer this question. So diversity, equity, and inclusion became a hot topic after the televised murder of George Floyd. Do you think this is a movement or is it a moment? Start with you.
Okay. My name is Keita, and I am the Chief Diversity Officer at FanDuel. So, interesting question. I certainly don't think it's a moment. I think it's a movement. I think that, diversity, equity, and inclusion was, always something I think that was maybe in the background, maybe not in the forefront as it is today. I think with the murder of George Floyd, I think companies took a different shift and just started to realize that there are really some inequities that really need to be addressed. And I think that, from the murder of George Floyd and feeling some type of empathy around that, recognizing the importance, the impact diversity has on really the bottom line, I think now it's more of a movement versus a moment.
Ooh, that's loud. Nice hot mic. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Nia Darville. I'm the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Allyship Program Manager at Greenhouse Software. And to answer your question, I think it's a moment that has the potential to turn into a movement. And what's keeping it from turning into a movement is measurable operational changes in all of our organizations. So a lot of people are still trying to understand, okay, how do we operationalize inclusion? What does it look like? How do we measure it? How do we find out what the impact is? And until companies really understand how to do that, they can't transition from a moment to a movement.
Now this is also interactive, so if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand, I'll bring you the mic. Okay? So on to our next question. What are companies doing that you guys have seen to ensure that this is a movement and to prepare for the future of DE&I? Nia, you want to start off?
Ooh, a two-person panel, so lots of questions. What are companies doing for the future of DE&I? I think something that we're doing at our company is we're really bridging the gap between employee experience and diversity and inclusion. They cannot be two separate departments anymore. They have to be one and the same. And so one way to make it a movement, like I mentioned earlier, is to operationalize it. How are you measuring what inclusion looks like in your company? Are you doing inclusion surveys? Are you having focus groups? This week I had the opportunity to double tap, dig deeper with certain demographics in our organization. We looked at our inclusion survey results and saw and filtered it by gender and race. And we noticed that specific intersections, specific demographics of people scored much lower than the rest of our organization. And so instead of just saying, okay, well, we need to improve this for everyone in our organization, we said, let's talk to those groups. Let's find out exactly why their experience is different, and let's find out how we can make it better for them, because if we make it better for them, we can make it better for everyone. And so I think that's what the key is. I think it's, number one, combining employee experience with the DE&I department, and number two is really figuring out how to measure inclusion and measure whether or not you're making an impact in your organization.
So, love that answer. I've been at FanDuel now for 2 months. Before that, I was at JP Morgan, and I think companies are on different trajectories, right? And that's why I think it's a movement. I think that different companies, I think, are realizing the importance of DE&I. And like you said, they're trying to institutionalize it in a way that it's impactful for everybody at the company. Now, I came to FanDuel 2 months ago. They didn't have a DE&I officer. It was very grassroots what was happening around this, recognizing that they needed someone to actually focus on this, right? Understand the data and the metrics behind it, right? Are we focusing on diversity, bringing in diverse individuals? Are we focusing on those at the company? Building a strategy around that, and that's what they hired me for to do. So I don't know what the key is for that, but I think that, companies have to recognize the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think they need to have someone who focuses solely on that. I don't think it can be somebody's side job to do this. And I don't think it's also, we had ERGs that weren't really chartered or formalized, and they were trying to do it, and that wasn't working, right? So now that I've been there for 2 months, it's a whole different perspective as to how we're approaching DE&I and making sure it's ingrained in everything we do at the company. But I do agree with you. It starts with the data metrics. We've got to start benchmarking. Where are we starting? Where are we trying to go? Where are we, are we set up for scalable success? I think is also really important that companies have to look at. But I think it starts with recognizing the importance of it and then institutionalizing it in a company where it is helpful for the company and for the employees and everybody as a whole.
Good, because I was going to ask you guys a question. But go ahead.
I'm loud. I'm going to have to give me the mic. So my follow-up question to what you just said, what got FanDuel to that point where they knew they needed someone? Because a lot of people, we work at a place where it's real grassroots. We have ERGs, we kind of run it, and it's our second job.
Yeah.
So what we've been trying to do is get them to realize you need someone. Yeah. We can't do this as a side gig. So how did they get to that point?
No. That interesting question. You talked about that survey. That's what happened. They did a survey about diversity, equity, inclusion, and all other types of things. And they were like, it's not working what y'all are doing, right? They had a diversity council, but it was people kind of raised their hands. It wasn't really the senior business individuals who needed to be on that council to kind of understand why it's important for them. I think it was more of a grassroots efforts by the employees. They started the ERGs. And then in the employee survey, they were like, y'all need to hire somebody here and make sure that this is really what you guys are talking about, really what you are really committed to this. And it's funny. So like I said, I've been there 2 months. So they did this survey in the beginning of the year. They just did a follow-up survey, and the results just came out yesterday. DE&I think we went from 2, and now we're at 8 out of a 10. And they were like, Keita's here. Keita hears us. Keita's moving the needle in this area that we feel like we're being heard, that there's a representative at the table, and that we are really we are really believing now that FanDuel is serious about this.
Yeah, Greenhouse had a similar journey. So we just got our first diversity officer 2 years ago, right before the pandemic. So I like to say they were a little bit on the cutting edge before everybody else was getting into it. But it was similar. Usually it starts with employees. It's a grassroots effort. And companies are realizing that employees are not standing for this being their second job. This needs to be someone's job. It needs to be a paid job. ERG leadership positions should have equity or some type of compensation tied to them because it is additional responsibility that makes the company better.
I also think, can I just, going back to like FanDuel, right? Just the company that I'm at, you know, I said I was at JP Morgan, now I'm at FanDuel. It's a very young company, right? The employees are young and they speak out. Like, you know, like it's a very vibrant, energizing, and they demand for their leadership to hear them, right? And I think it's interesting, our CEO is a woman who I love, and she is clearly all in and was like, you know, we got to find the right person, we're going to do it, and they found me. But I think it was really like the employees who were like, this is something that's really important to us. You say it's important, now do something about it, right? And they did.
I would say, I do chair one of our ERGs at Warner Brothers Discovery, and people know that we're going through some challenges and changes. So we did have DE&I, and I think we still have, but it was still challenges and still changing. We still don't know what the final thing is going to be. And chairing ERG, and I got one of my board members in here, it is a second job, but it's something that I actually enjoy. But being that you're at FanDuel, 2 months, can you give an example of what have you done or implemented to change from a 2 to 8 on that survey?
Wow. I'm a people person. I talk to people. I go around and hear what the issues are. Like our ERGs, right? Rechartered, what's your mission, how we're going to influence the business. Like just getting that all off the ground. We started a women leadership development program that's going to be starting in January, right? Just saying that we are investing in this community. We've got a whole breaking barriers session. It's an internal video where we interview individuals that have broken barriers, right? So to show people in our company, like, this could be you, or these are the challenges that have been overcome. I think people are seeing now that, like, diversity is talked about. I was down here, I came from New York, but I went to Spelman, right? And we have a big office. FanDuel has a big office down here. And I came down here with my boss, who's the chief people officer. And she said, you know, I'd really like to meet some students. I have a son at Morehouse. I called him up. I said, who is the head of the technology, group at Spelman, Morehouse, and Clark? We went on the campus. We spoke to the students. It's all about attracting. They looked at me. They were like, oh, my God, how did you do this? And I'm like, this is what we do, right? This is what we're trying to do. We need to attract individuals. And I spoke at our town hall, and literally it was like list of stuff that we had started to implement already. And I think they're seeing the change. By me being there, it's representative, I think, of what the company's trying to do and what the employees want to see.
Now let me ask you guys, at the companies that you're at, do you see any changes as it relates to DE&I? And I know you have a question.
Hello, hi, I'm Kaylin Wilson from Dream Forward Consulting. It's funny you said that because that actually was what I was about to comment. So I work on the consulting side with companies to work through their DEI journeys as well as their organizational development journeys too. And one of the key action items that I often take care of for them is org readiness for their DEI leads to come in. So especially for startups, some of them don't even really have a fully built out HR department. And so I help them understand what's the landscape for the employee life cycle. Do you have the infrastructure set up for inclusion? What does that look like? Where are the gaps? We have a survey project, and so we get a chance to work through all of that so that when their DEI lead comes in, it's not total chaos, right, for their first 90 days. And then they're on that glass cliff where it's like, well, what have you done? It's like, what have I not done? It was too chaotic for me to get anything done. But I think the other side to org readiness is also the willingness to fail forward. And so for a lot of companies, they're so afraid of their reputations being harmed, especially at the senior leadership level, and their egos are on the line, right? Because they get paid a lot of money to always have the answer, that this nebulous space of DEI, they're like, I don't want to be wrong about that, and then I end up being pegged as a racist or a misogynist or whatever. So I think that there are a couple of levels to be able to engage other stakeholders with companies, to be able to prepare, right, that org readiness piece. And then it's the other side as far as helping organizations to feel comfortable failing forward.
All right. Any?
I can wait. All right, it's all good. We family.
It's mine.
All right. So first of all, thank you all so much for your advocacy. To me, I believe nothing really happens without leadership. And so it's great that the organizations that you work for recognize that change was needed, and they need to bring someone from the outside in to help create that change, to be a driver. My question is kind of twofold. One, typically, how do you all make sure that your efforts, that you get traction and it sticks and you continue to progress? Because a lot of times it could be cultural biases or cultural headwinds that you're facing, right? And particularly what I have found, organizations, like as an example, I worked with an organization, I won't throw them up under the bus, but they were really big on the DE&I. We stood up an ERG group here in Atlanta and started really pushing more engagement for women, black and brown in cybersecurity. It was great, but when the economic headwinds came, all of a sudden the focus was, well, that's more of an option as opposed to being a mission critical. And with the economy projected to be a significant downturn, my question to you all is strategically, how are you all making sure that you can position yourself where this stays the main thing, right? It stays embedded in the core of who the organization said they want to become and be, as opposed to start splitting the atom going, well, we'll get back to that because now it's about survival mode, and that's not part of survival. How do you all protect the mission, right, no matter what the economic situation may be?
Go ahead.
The other thing I experienced too at the same company is sometimes when leaders become stakeholders of DEI, they have their own definition of DEI, and they get very comfortable with that definition. So in their case, it could be just women. I'm doing my part. Look, we're winning. And then in that case, we had a stakeholder meeting with those who were left behind. They were black and brown women, and he couldn't understand what the dissent was. Well, look at it. They put the time in. They've gotten great reviews, but there's been no promotions and there's no advocacy. But now you're coming off offended, and they're going, well, where's my advocate? So how do you all make sure that it's really inclusive, right? That you really measure throughout the entire spectrum of DEI as opposed to people cherry picking, well, I'm comfortable with this, and now I'm going to claim it's a win for the entire program.
Ooh.
It's a mountain.
It was a mountain. I'm going to answer part 2 first. So I am a firm believer that diversity and equity and inclusion is not a one-size-fits-all solution for each company. Each company is going to have its own needs. Each company is going to have its own focus, and that focus will always shift over time. If your company is really successful at diversity, equity, inclusion, you should be having targeted focus that progresses through the years. So maybe the first focus was women. You said, okay, our numbers are really, really off when it comes to gender, right? So let's look at our women versus men, non-binary, all of those different standards, and let's bring them up. Okay, now we've gotten that. Now let's look closer at this women's statistic. Okay, is it equitable across women? Okay, now let's look at trans women. Is it equitable across that population? Okay, now let's look at age, right? So if you are a growing, developing vibrant company that is really focused on diversity and inclusion, your metrics, your goals, your focus will constantly expand. And what people care about is that you communicate that. They don't necessarily care that you're perfect at it right now. They care that you're on a journey. And they care that that journey is mapped out and is clear. So saying at the beginning of that process, hey, right now we're gonna focus on women. And then once we get that to where we need it to go, we're gonna focus on the kinds of women, the different demographics of, the different dimensions of diversity within that group of women. So it's really about that journey. And then the first question you asked was around, do you remember the first question?
No, I'm ready to answer. I feel like I got so much to say, but I don't know if it's going to answer what you.
How do you, preserve? It's preserving a.
You know, I agree with you. I think it has to be, each company's different, right? So there has to be intentionality around where your strategy is going to go, right? I can talk about this company that I'm with, right? Like I said, the CEO is a woman in a male-dominated industry, right? She's a white woman, and 43% of her executive team are women, white women. So, you know, I think FanDuel's like, we're doing a great job, right, in diversity. And I applaud that. I think, oh my God, and that's why I came to the company, because I kind of interviewed with all women, and I was like, are there any men here? Like, what's going on? And then I get there, and I'm like, okay, there are a lot of men. There are a lot of men. But like I said, we're doing this women's leadership development program. Okay, let me back up. The CEO said to me, Keita, I've done really well with women. Acknowledging I haven't done that well with ethnic minorities, or with the LGBTQIA community, or with those with disability, right? I need you to help me with that, right? Like, and I was just like, whoa, champion, right? We're doing this women's leadership development program. I pulled the numbers, right? Because I'm making sure that we are ethnically diverse in the women's portion of this. It is important. Like, when I present my numbers, this is the percentage of diverse individuals that are eligible. I am constantly putting that in front. I think that you're right, the definition of diversity, I think each company's got to figure out what that is and what they're going to focus on. But I think there's always, like, I think being there is always shining a different lens, right? We're doing great. I champion what we're doing around women. It's great. But I do see, like, there are other groups here that don't feel the same level of intentionality. And how can we change that? I am constantly talking about this, right? Constantly talking about, we're doing great here, let's champion what we're doing, but we still have to make sure that we're taking others on our journey, right? It's hard, it's hard.
And the final part of that question was, are you all open to looking at outside companies, right? Sister here. I got you, right? As partners, absolutely, right? That really help drive that change and accelerate those changes. So where there are gaps, right, in improvement or results, do you all feel like, because you're driving the change, but how comfortable are you all with saying, you know what, I think we can go faster and really have a bigger impact if I reach out to a third party partner and help drive this narrative, help drive this particular initiative?
So since the
The big
pandemic,
cost comes in now.
Yeah, that's what I say. And then we talk about this.
since the pandemic, I've gotten very wary of diversity and inclusion consultants, not you, but there have been so many people who have popped up as diversity and inclusion consultants that are not skilled at what they do. And so the diversity and inclusion consultants that I've interacted with, I could probably say 20% of them were worth the money that we paid them. There's value sometimes in bringing a third party, but we just talked about how most of our movements start are with grassroots within. So it's those relationships, it's those people who have been around in the company from when it started or who have been around for years and years and years. It's about building a relationship with those people. It's about finding out what they want, what they're comfortable with, and then if you're going to go with a third party, vetting them so rigorously to ensure that they're not inflicting more damage on the organization, to make sure that they are not proposing more performative types of things as opposed to things that will create real change within the organization. And honestly, when you use people from within the organization, it helps with change management. It helps with getting people on board. It helps with getting people excited about what's happening because they trust who they've worked with. So it can depend. Some organizations, you may not have the bandwidth. You may not have the people. You may not have the budget yet to bring in a chief diversity officer. In FanDuel's case, maybe they could have used a consultant before they brought in a chief diversity officer. However, by bringing in that chief diversity officer, she's been able to build proximity. She's been able to build relationship. You saw they went from a 2 to an 8, right? That's because they know she's for them, and she's going to stay with them.
You know, it's interesting because I think, because I'm so new, and I'm just trying to get the lay of the land and figure out what this strategy should look like, right? But eventually figuring out, where there are gaps, where we need help. But I will tell you, this Women's Leadership Development Program was in the works before I got there. And we are using an outside consultant. And I had to say to them, okay, let's make sure this outside consultant represents every single woman that's in this, because the journey for each woman is different. We've got, Indian women, we've got Black women, we've got Latino, we've got, LGBT. We got to make sure that this program meets individual needs of these women, but also the needs of the group as a whole. And are we making sure that this consultant can do that, right? Because there's a lot of nuances, right? I'm new. I hope nobody from FanDuel's here, because I feel like I'm giving a lot of, but and trying to navigate that, right? But I do have this company is very much like a sponge, and they're like, what can we do? What can we do? What do we do now?
And they're more likely to do that if they know you're going to stay.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So talking about, kind of piggybacking off bringing in a third party, what technology solutions or general improvements as it relates to DE&I are you seeing in the workplace and in different companies?
So this is where I plug my company. I work for a company called Greenhouse Software. And what they do is actually specialize in taking the bias out of the recruiting and hiring process by implementing structured hiring. So it's really cool. We work with a lot of companies like Dropbox and Airbnb and a lot of companies on the West Coast, both small and medium-sized as well as enterprise levels. But what is really powerful about this process is it makes you step back and make sure you're analyzing the specific attributes that you need for jobs. You're not looking at what schools they went to. You're not looking at, okay, does this personality jive with mine? It's, is this person really good at time management? Is this person really good at cross-functional engagement, et cetera? So you're really examining the attributes. That's an amazing company. Another amazing company that is not the company I work for, but I love plugging them, is Factuality. It is the best diversity and inclusion one-time training program that you can bring into your organization. They basically gamify inclusion. It makes you pick someone who has a completely different identity than you and takes you through this game where basically you write down 10 things that are most important to you, and then throughout the game, as you learn history, as you learn what things, how privilege really works, you have to lose things that are most important to you. So you might lose Netflix time, you might lose your family, you might lose tea. So it's an amazing, amazing company. I definitely recommend you reach out to them. for training. So greenhouse software and factuality.
So I love hearing all of this because I'm in the stage of trying to identify, what's out there, right? I will tell you, when I came to FanDuel, we have this required training that people have to take, right? And I remember seeing the diversity one, and it was like super long, boring. I was like, oh no, like this is definitely needs to be revitalized, something more interactive. So I think we're in that journey right now. They're looking at me like, Keita, what do we need? What do we need? So it's good to hear that. But I think it has to be something, I talked about this earlier in the other session, and maybe some of you can help me with this. I feel as though the community at FanDuel, young, vibrant, and energetic, and a lot of movement and talk around DE&I is around the ERGs, right? But I feel like those are the people who understand it and get it, right? What about those who aren't in ERGs? Those who just come to work, who go to work and I'm here to do my job, and this really doesn't have anything to do with me. I'm trying to figure out how to crack that nut, because we're talking about inclusive environments. We're talking about being at a place where everybody feels comfortable. Everybody's got to be on board, right? I need to come to work because you've given me an environment where I'm good, right? And I still haven't. I'm still trying to figure out, how do you do that? We have these Women Leadership Development Program. We have the ERGs. But I'm preaching to the choir. How about the white male who's the technologist over there who's like, hey, Keita, come to work and I go home. Then that's it, right? They don't feel that, to me, and I mean, I'm not all of them, but the majority, don't feel that connection or how DE&I impacts them.
Okay, so that kind of flows into my last question. How do we continue to increase DE&I awareness and empathy? Meaning, how do we change the hearts and minds of folks that have no clue of what others are experiencing? What are your thoughts?
You attach it to money and career progression. So if you are operationalizing inclusion in your company, your look-back outlooks or your performance management should have a portion that talks about, okay, how are you getting involved in inclusion and diversity here at the company? In our look-back outlooks, we include work that people do for ERGs. We include work that people are doing within their own roles. Something that I've never seen at any other organization is that everyone considers diversity and inclusion to be a part of their role at Greenhouse. And so that results in our customer-facing teams realizing that, sometimes our people of color who are serving in these customer-facing roles are receiving bias from customers and actioning on that. Not coming to the DE&I team and saying, hey, I don't know what to do about this, but going, hey, this is my role, this is my expertise, and I'm gonna figure out a way to support the people who are working for me. And why? Because that's gonna be attached to whether or not I get a promotion, that's gonna be attached to whether or not I get my bonus, et cetera. So I think, yes, we can always go the heart route, but the heart route doesn't necessarily work for everyone. Money usually talks, though.
Yeah, I'm so conflicted on this, right? Because I feel like money does talk, right? But then I feel like it's a check the box for people. And so it's a little bit of, has to be both. And it's like changing the minds. And I tell this story. I did a fireside chat in Atlanta when I came down here with my boss. And I talked about, when I was interviewing for this job, it was all on screen, right? It was Zoom. I'd never been in the office, and I met all these fabulous women. And the day before I was going to work, my girlfriends wanted to take me out. And I was like, I gotta go home. I gotta take my braids out. And my girls were like, what? I was like, I gotta take my braids out. I'm going to work at this company. And they didn't interview me with my braid. And my girls are like, that's horrible, right? And I was like, I'm gonna get this thing straight, right, before I walk in. And I walked in the first day, and I was like, why did I do that? There were like people with tattoos, like dread, like it was so funny. And I was like, okay, I was like trying to be vulnerable and be like, I realized like this is an inclusive environment and I love it and I'm proud to be here, right? So there was a white male in the audience who kind of raised his hand in the back and he's like, hi, I just have to tell you something. He's like, I'm a senior manager here and I have a team of like hundreds of people. And he was like, I didn't realize that Black women had issues or concerns about their hair. I didn't even know that. He's like, I get up every day and I just go to work. I don't even think about my hair. I'm like, well, let me educate you, okay? And afterwards, he came up to me and he was like, oh my God, can we have more sessions like this? Like, I just feel like I just need to, my experience as a white man, like I don't even think about things. I don't understand what people go through, but now I have like empathy, like understanding like what a Black woman might be experiencing, right? And I was so happy after that. I was like, yes, I've like changed some. And now like I just was in the office today and I went over, he's like, Keita, let me talk to you. I'm trying to diversify my team and how can I be more supportive and what do I need to do for women and people of color and all that. Having those discussions, I think opens up the doors and eyes to people like, wow, my experience may be different from somebody else's, and what can I do to be supportive? I think that changes like people, and genuinely changes, because when I see people are like, oh, we got a quota, we got, then it talks about, at my old company, it was like, do I have the right candidate? What's that mean? Like, well, is this gonna give me credit? What, we're looking for credit now, right? Like, and it wasn't like generally like, and I tell people are like, do I have to pick them because they're a woman or because they're Black? And well, no. I said, what you will do is diversity, gender, all of these diversity classifications are a factor that we consider when we are hiring, because it's all this like, are they qualified, right? And I can't stand that. Like, wait, are they qualified? Wait, we don't ever say that when we're talking about other people, but when it's like women or people of color, it's like, are they qualified for the job? Okay, let's stop right there. But like, just thinking about how we change the dialogue, how people look at things, and I feel like eventually we won't be talking about this, right? And it won't be like, am I gonna get more money? And I understand, I feel like money moves people, but I just feel like I gotta change hearts and minds.
Yeah,
first.
I think it's both and, right?
Exactly.
Because if you have people in positions of authority who are making the experiences of people underneath them intolerable, then that's an issue. And I love what you said about that story, right? I feel like that's our universal language, is storytelling. Yeah. And the only way you can understand someone, the only way you can even start gaining empathy is through storytelling. So how do you create a culture of storytelling at your organization? How do you make sure that managers start meetings vulnerably? How do you make sure that managers are encouraging people to share their stories? How do you make sure senior leadership is sharing their story? Because as you hear different people's stories, you gain empathy and perspective. That man had never heard about the struggle.
You worried about your hair?
Yeah, yeah. And he would never have known that if she hadn't shared her story.
Another thing too, I told you we had this like survey, right? And so we had people write in. I mean, our scores went up, but there were people who wrote in that said, I don't believe in all this diversity stuff. I don't see gender. I don't see color. It's divisive, right? So of course they're like calling me, Keita, oh my God, somebody wrote this. And I was like, I love that they wrote this. Oh my God, I was like, first of all, we have a company where people can say what they want and they can do what they want. And I said, it just gives me fuel, because people don't understand the importance of diversity. They think their experience is like anybody else. Everybody's all upset or whatever. I was like, well, you know what? We can't do that. I want to hear dialogue like this, because I want to be able to talk to people about, my experience is different from yours. And I'm in an underrepresented group, and this is what happens for people who are underrepresented group. Those conversations to me are critical, because I think and I said to the company, I was like, I think a lot of people probably feel this way. They're just scared to say it. They're scared. They're scared to say it.
Well, we are at time. Now, I do believe, just my personal thought, DE&I is not left upon the company as a whole. It takes us a partnership between the employees and the company. And I think we have to hold them accountable, especially now that we know that there's a better way. And if they don't want to comply, then there's other folks that do. But anyway, thank you guys for joining us for this. I want to thank my panelists. The ladies held it down. And it is time for reception and drinks. So, all right, you guys, thank you.